My name is Avery. 32 years old, single with a bachelor's degree in literature, but never once called the pride of the family. On a bitterly cold March morning in the suburbs of Baton Rouge, my mother threw a wrinkled lace dress onto my bed, yellowed like old paper, and said exactly 7 words: "You're getting married next week." That's it. I stared at the dress. It looked like it had been rushed together by someone stitching and cursing at the same time. The neckline was crooked, one sleeve longer than the other, and loose threads dangled from every seam. The hem was still damp, like it had just been rinsed in a kitchen sink. My mother didn't look at me once as she gave the order. She stood at the doorway, arms crossed, face hard as stone. I wanted to ask, who? Why? Are you serious? But I knew there'd be no answer. My father, Walter, sat motionless in his old recliner in the living room, a local newspaper spread across his lap. I wasn't sure if he heard anything at all, but I didn't expect him to intervene. He never had. "I don't even know the guy," I said, voice barely steady. "Then you better start getting used to him," my mother replied flatly. No invitations. No blessings. No wedding cake or bouquet. Just a name that slipped from her lips a few days later. Dylan Ortiz, a 39-year-old widowed construction worker who helped rebuild the Baptist church near town. I vaguely remembered seeing him once or twice. Quiet face, didn't smile, didn't talk. "A girl like you should be grateful someone's willing to marry you." My mother said it like she was tossing a bucket of ice water in my face. "This is where you belong." My sister, Becky, sat nearby, scrolling her phone, smirking without even glancing up. "Make sure you wash your hair before the wedding, Avery," she said. "If it's greasy like that, don't be surprised if he runs." I didn't argue. I just stood there holding the dress, feeling like I'd just been packaged up like a factory defect. No tags, no guarantee. The wedding happened 5 days later. A Saturday afternoon in a small, rundown chapel behind town. The carpet smelled musty, the wooden pews creaked like they were protesting. No music, no out-of-town relatives. The old pastor muttered the vows like he was reading off a leave request form. I wore the dress my mother gave me, neckline still off, sleeves still puckered. My name was printed wrong on the ceremony program. Aubrey Miller instead of Avery Morgan. I showed my mother. She shrugged. "Doesn't matter. Nobody pays attention to that anymore." After signing the marriage license, I heard my mother whisper to my sister at the back row, "Thank God we finally got rid of her." No hugs. No goodbye. No one drove me home. They just stood there watching as I climbed into Dylan's beat-up pickup truck. My legal husband, a man I hadn't had a single real conversation with. The door groaned shut like it objected to my presence. I pulled the seatbelt over my wrinkled dress. My purse was nearly empty. No wallet, no phone. Just a handkerchief my Aunt Rose had sewn for me with a single embroidered A in the corner. She once told me, "No matter what they take from you, always keep something that still has your name on it." I clenched that handkerchief in my palm for the entire ride away from that chapel, feeling colder with every mile. No one waved. No one saw me off. That was the day I was cut off from my family, as if I'd never existed. But I did exist. And I remembered every word they said. Dylan's silver pickup truck turned onto a winding red dirt road, passing harvested cornfields and a few scattered abandoned farms. I didn't ask where we were going, he didn't offer. The silence between us was thick like early southern fog, not cold but dense and lingering. I sat close to the window, clutching the embroidered handkerchief with the letter A, the last thing on me that still held my name. No cell signal. An empty wallet. My wrinkled wedding dress was now coated in seat dust. About 2 hours later, Dylan pulled up to a small white house tucked behind a larger colonial-style estate, far from town. The main house had tall columns, fresh white paint, and a wide porch. But the place meant for me was a detached guest cottage with its own gravel path, surrounded by naturally growing lavender. No sign. No one waiting. But the wooden door opened quietly without a key. Inside it was spotless. Simple, tidy, not a single item out of place. A small living room, a galley-style kitchen, and a bedroom with neatly folded linens. On the dining table sat a handwritten note in ballpoint pen. "You can take the bedroom. I'll stay out here. There's water in the fridge. If you need anything, leave a note. D." I stood in the kitchen, unsure whether to take off my shoes or bolt for the door. But my legs felt heavy, like they had finally hit solid ground after years of drifting. Dylan didn't ask if I was hungry. But that evening he cooked scrambled eggs, toast, and a slice of avocado. He placed the plate in front of me, then sat across the table with an old magazine, saying nothing. I ate. Not quickly, not pretending to be grateful. But the first bite calmed my stomach. For the first time in days, my breathing felt even. There was something in that room, not love, but the absence of fear. After dinner, Dylan stood up without a word. He set a clean towel over the chair, then stretched out on the fold-out couch near the window, his back turned, not distant, just respectfully quiet. I went into the bedroom, took off the wedding dress, and put on a gray t-shirt he had left folded on the bed. When I turned on my phone, there was only one message from my mother. It's done. Don't come back. No punctuation. No, love mom. No hesitation. I powered it off, placed it face down, and lay silently on the bed, not crying, not screaming. Just still, with the handkerchief pressed in my palm like a wordless prayer for the only person who had ever spoken to me gently, Aunt Rose. The next morning, when I stepped out of the bedroom, a plate of warm pancakes and a fresh cup of coffee were already set on the table. No note, but beside the plate was a new bottle of shampoo, citrus-scented, the exact brand I used. I had never told him. I looked out the window. Dylan was barefoot, watering the tomato plants in the small garden behind the house, wearing a faded t-shirt. Morning light touched his light brown hair, making him look different. Not the man my mother shipped me off to. Not a nameless construction worker. Just a person working, breathing, existing. Not watching. Not judging. I stepped out onto the porch, voice hoarse from sleep. Thank you. Dylan set the hose down, turned back slowly. You don't owe me anything, Avery. Just eat it while it's warm. It wasn't comfort. It was truth. No strings. No debt. I sat at the table and ate. The warmth from the mug settled into my fingers. It wasn't the best breakfast I'd ever had. But it was the first one I ate without being judged, rushed, or told to be strong. Then I saw a small scrap of paper tucked under the shampoo bottle. One line written. Noticed yours was running low. I laughed, not loud, not dramatic. But for the first time, I didn't feel like something broken someone was trying to discard. It wasn't love yet. But it was the beginning of something that didn't require me to give up who I was just to survive. I used to think Dylan Ortiz was the kind of man who had nothing to hide. He didn't talk much, lived simply, and treated me with a quiet kindness, something I had never experienced in the house I grew up in. But about 3 weeks after the wedding, the first cracks started to show. Not because he did anything wrong, but because everything felt too right. One afternoon, while fumbling under the sink for bug spray, I accidentally found a stainless steel tool case. Shiny, top grade, the kind only A-level professionals would own. Not the cheap stuff from Home Depot. Inside weren't mismatched screwdrivers and rusty wrenches, but a new Makita power drill, a Bosch laser measure, a digital level, and a custom carbon steel socket set. I knew what I was looking at. I had worked part-time at a hardware store one summer to pay for school. I closed the case and put it back. But that night I started paying attention to the kitchen, the one I had never really noticed before. A 6-burner cooktop, heat-resistant glass surface, touch control panel, identical to the Wolf professional model I'd seen in a home design magazine. Starting price, nearly $6,000. Way too expensive for the compact kitchen in a side house, what my mother called the kind of place a girl like you deserves. I started noticing more. Dylan didn't use an old phone like I thought. It was a new Google Pixel with a titanium frame. His shirts sometimes had tiny logos. Ralph Lauren, Brooks Brothers. Every morning, he brewed coffee with a Breville Barista Express, not a $20 machine from the supermarket. But he never flaunted anything. Never explained. That Wednesday morning, I woke early to the sound of an engine. When I pulled back the curtain, I saw Dylan starting up a graphite-colored Audi A6 sedan. Spotless, not a single scratch, parked where the old pickup used to be. He wore a white dress shirt, gray slacks, and polished Oxford shoes. No tool belt, no smell of motor oil, just a faint cologne and the confident steps of someone from another world. I threw on clothes, tied up my hair, and quietly followed from a few cars back. The farther we got from the quiet neighborhood, the taller the buildings grew, changing from repair shops to law firms and investment banks. Dylan turned into the garage beneath a 20-story black glass tower in downtown Baton Rouge, the headquarters of Travis Green Capital Partners. I stopped across the street frozen. I had once applied for a receptionist job there. The starting salary was double what I made before. That building didn't accept handwritten resumes. It wasn't for people who were just enough. Dylan walked through the automatic glass doors with no hesitation. The security guard nodded at him like they were familiar. He didn't glance around, didn't hurry, didn't seem out of place. He belonged there. That night, I made chicken and green beans for dinner. My hands shook holding the knife. I didn't know whether to feel angry, scared, or relieved. He came home around 8 p.m., shirt still crisp, smiled and asked, "You made this? Smells amazing." I didn't respond right away. After he washed up and sat down, I finally asked, "You said you're a handyman. But I saw you this morning at Travis Green." Dylan set his knife down and looked up at me. "No panic. No lies. I was going to tell you." He exhaled slowly. "My real last name isn't Ortiz. It's Witford." I swallowed. Witford, one of the founding families of the oldest investment firms in Louisiana. I was born into that family. But even when I was young, I knew I didn't want to follow the path they laid out. I studied finance, got an MBA, but started my own firm. I didn't use the family name. Didn't touch the inheritance. I stared. "Then why marry me?" Dylan met my eyes without blinking. "I didn't marry you by choice. But once I had to, I decided I could at least live honestly. I don't need a perfect wife. Just someone who doesn't see me as a walking wallet." The room fell silent. I sat there feeling everything I thought I knew unravel. But one thing, his eyes, made me stay seated. "I didn't hide it to deceive you. I hid it to be myself. And to see who stays when there's no family name, no money." I wasn't sure if I believed him yet. But that night I didn't lock the bedroom door. Just didn't. Monday morning I received an embossed invitation card with my sister's name, Becky Morgan, printed in gold shimmer letters. An intimate celebration for her promotion, 6 p.m. this Saturday. My name wasn't on the envelope. It was sent to the guest house address, but there was no +1 included. I held the card in my hands for a long time. Not out of surprise, but because after everything that had happened they still thought I would show up. "Are you planning to go?" Dylan asked when he saw me place the card on the table. "Maybe. Just to see if they still have the guts to look me in the eye." He didn't try to talk me out of it. Just nodded and handed me a small pouch, a pair of pearl earrings. "They're not expensive, but just enough so you won't fade into the background." Saturday evening, I drove back to the old neighborhood in the northern suburbs of Baton Rouge. My parents' house had been repainted, light gray, new door, new roof. 2 rented SUVs were parked on the street along with a few expensive sports cars. The door was opened by a man in a suit, someone who looked more like a hired server than a family friend. I stepped inside, where the smell of expensive candles and fresh flowers drowned out any old memories. White leather sofas, canvas art on the walls. No trace of the aging house I once lived in. No grandmother's rocking chair, no piano Mom used to force me to practice. My mother, Sandra, came out from the kitchen holding a cocktail glass. She wore an emerald green silk dress, gold heels, and her hair was perfectly curled. She looked at me as if seeing an early guest she didn't expect. "Well, there you are." Her voice was indifferent. No hug, no handshake. Just a quick glance from head to toe. "The party's in the backyard. Try not to draw attention." I walked through the living room unnoticed. A strange woman whispered to her friend, "Is that the older daughter?" I thought she moved out of state. Outside, my sister was beaming in the middle of a crowd. She wore a white dress like a wedding gown, a Tiffany necklace, holding a glass of champagne. Behind her stood the gift table loaded with bags from Louis Vuitton, Saks, and Bloomingdale's. I carefully placed my gift, a hand-embroidered frame with her favorite Bible verse, next to the expensive boxes. It looked out of place like me. Becky turned when she saw me. She smiled, the kind of smile that confirms her social standing. "Well, you actually came?" "You sent an invite," I replied calmly. She shrugged and sipped her drink. "Must have been a system glitch." Before I could respond, the MC stepped onto a mini stage and clapped loudly. "Everyone, may I have your attention? It's time to honor the woman of the night." The curtain behind him drew back, revealing a two-tier cake decorated with sugar roses. The words written in white chocolate. To our one and only star, firstborn Becky. Not Becky and Avery. Not our daughters. Just one person. I didn't cry, but it felt like someone punched me in the chest. An older woman approached my mom at the buffet, her voice full of admiration. You must be so proud to have two such accomplished daughters. My mother set down her glass and smiled coldly. I only have one daughter. The other one is a lesson. I heard every word despite the music playing. That wasn't a slip. It was intentional. I don't remember how I left the table, just that my hands were clenched so tightly the embroidered frame cracked. Still, I placed it down carefully, as if I still wanted to hold on to some decency. As I walked through the hallway toward the front door, I heard another comment. My mother again, speaking near the drink station. That one? A charity case our family once tried to help. But you can't scrub out what's stained inside. I stepped out the front door without turning back. No arguing. No breaking down. No letting them see me weak. On the drive home, I didn't play music. I just sat there, hands cold on the steering wheel, mind blank. But deep down, something was cracking. Not my heart, but the final thread that once connected me to what people call family. I used to think I had grown numb to being dismissed, from my mother's cold stares, my father's silence, to the sharp-edged words of my sister. But I never imagined I'd feel invisible even in the world of someone who once opened their door to me, offered me shelter when no one else remembered my name. That evening, Dylan received an invitation to a casual afternoon tea hosted at his family's main estate, the Witford mansion, where his mother, Margaret Whitford, planned a reunion of familiar faces. The handwritten note read, "We hope to see Dylan and guest." It took me over an hour to decide what to wear. I finally chose a navy linen dress with long sleeves and a high collar, simple but graceful. I tied my hair neatly, wore the pearl earrings Dylan once gave me, and tucked into my purse a handkerchief embroidered with the letter A keepsake from Aunt Rose, still folded like the day she gave it to me. Not to impress. Just to remind myself, I wasn't going there to seek approval. The Whitford estate was vast, like a vintage New Orleans hotel, with crystal chandeliers, walnut-paneled walls, and endless hallways. As we entered, the butler nodded at Dylan and then looked at me as if waiting for me to hand over a coat or staff badge. I didn't blame him. My dress wasn't Chanel. A woman in a black dress with a clipboard and an elegant updo walked over. "Oh, Dylan. Perfect timing, we need help in the kitchen. Some guests arrived earlier than expected." She turned to me swiftly as if I weren't anyone of note. "Ma'am, please bring the tart tray to the tea room. Just place it neatly, no need to push." I stood still. No reaction. No need to explain. Dylan started to speak up, but I gently touched his arm. "It's okay," I whispered. I carried the blueberry tart tray, walking across the marble hallway, past the chatter and clinking of champagne glasses. No one looked at me. Or if they did, it was like I was part of the furniture. Behind a silk curtain near a side hallway, I heard a woman's whisper. "Who is she?" "Just a guest," I heard. "Not family. Not important." I slowed down, the tray steady in my hands. But my back stiffened, not from anger but from the all-too-familiar sting of such words. When you walk into a room and no one believes you belong. I set the tray in the center of the room beside the stacked glassware. Then I stepped back, slowly heading to the back garden, where fewer people gathered. I needed air. I needed to keep those murmurs from sticking to my skin like the things my mother used to say. The garden was quiet, with wind weaving through old willow branches and the faint scent of lavender from the flower beds. I pulled the handkerchief from my purse. Its soft fabric still carried the scent of Aunt Rose's powder. I raised it to my face, thinking I'd just wipe sweat. But the moment my fingers touched the stitched A, tears fell. No sobbing. No gasping. Just silent drops landing on my hand. Slowly, quietly, like the way they had always tried to erase me from the stories they told. No one came to find me. No one asked where I went. And strangely, I didn't expect them to. When I returned to the guest house, Dylan was waiting on the porch, leaning against a wooden column. When he saw me, he didn't ask questions. He simply handed me a cup of hot tea, my favorite with lemon and honey. I sat beside him, quiet. "They didn't notice you were gone," he said, voice soft as the breeze. "And you?" I asked. "Did you see me?" Dylan looked straight at me. I always do. I've just been waiting for you to be ready to be seen. I nodded. Not exactly forgiving what just happened. But for the first time I understood, presence doesn't need permission. I woke up at 5 a.m. mist still hugging the kitchen windows. Dylan was still asleep. The house was so quiet I could hear the kettle begin to hum. I didn't make coffee. I didn't toast bread. I sat at the wooden table, opened my laptop, placed both hands on the keyboard and watched the blinking cursor. No longer waiting for someone else. I opened a new document. Titled it, "To Those Who Said I Wasn't Enough." And I began to write. Not to accuse, but to rebirth myself. I wrote about the day my mother threw her old wedding dress on my bed, not caring if I wanted it or not. I wrote about a wedding with no flowers, no music, no blessing, just a paper and their relieved faces, believing they had married me off. I wrote about my sister, Becky, who stood at her party in a glowing white dress, beside a cake that read, "To our one and only star," while I stood nearby, unnamed, unmentioned. I wrote about that afternoon at the Witford estate, being handed a tray like a server, hearing whispers that once again tried to drown me in invisibility. But this time I wasn't silent. I had heard enough. I added 3 final paragraphs, not with resentment but with resolve. I don't need someone else to assign me value. I found it myself. And now I'm doing what no one thought I could. I'm founding a scholarship, the Avery Rose Fund, for girls in rural areas who dream but are never allowed to. I included details. The Avery Rose Scholarship Fund in partnership with a local nonprofit. Each initial scholarship would be worth $2,500, aimed at high school girls in rural parishes across Louisiana, where too often the only options are marry early and stay quiet. I sent the email to 4 places: the local paper Baton Rouge Today, the internal PR team of the Whitford Foundation, an educational blogger focused on gender equity, and lastly, my mother's old email still saved as Mom Home. I hit send. My heart steady. My hands firm. 3 days later, Baton Rouge Today ran the story. From silent bride to scholarship founder, Avery Morgan's journey. The article spread faster than I imagined. Dozens of emails poured in, from rural teachers, single parents, college freshmen who nearly dropped out. They didn't write to praise me. They wrote to say, "I used to be a stain too. But I'm done being quiet." A week later, a navy envelope arrived, embossed with the Whitford Foundation logo. Inside, an invitation. "Avery Morgan, we invite you to serve as co-director of the statewide girls' education program for the next 3 years. Nominated by Dylan Whitford." I read the words co-director over and over. Not wife of. Not +1. Me. I set the letter next to my still warm tea and for the first time in years, felt like my name finally had a place. That night, Dylan came home late. I left the letter on the dining table saying nothing. He glanced at it, then sat across from me. "I knew you wouldn't stop at surviving," he said. "And I knew you wouldn't hold me back," I replied. No toasts. No celebration. Just 2 people, survivors, no longer needing to explain. I walked into the small study by the porch and opened my laptop. On the screen was a list of high schools in the Southern Delta. I began drafting the first outreach email to each principal. My answer wasn't anger. It was this: email by email, scholarship by scholarship, child by child, called by the name they were always meant to have. The grand ballroom of the Beaumont Hotel, right in the heart of Baton Rouge, glittered under crystal chandeliers hanging from the high ceiling. Tables were draped in white satin, chairs tied with silver bows, and glassware lined up like it was awaiting a royal ritual. On the main stage, the logo of the Whitford Foundation glowed on a massive LED screen. Honor the past. Empower the present. Tonight was the annual gala, but unlike any other year. This was the first time the scholarship program I founded, the Avery Rose Scholarship Fund, was being honored as one of the top 3 most impactful initiatives for girls' education in the American South. I sat at the front table beside Dylan. He wore a midnight blue tuxedo, his wristwatch more of an accessory than a necessity. I wore a black dress with a square neckline and long sleeves, no glitter, no slit. On my hand was my wedding ring, for the first time since I walked out of that church with a torn hem and a frozen heart. Across the room I saw my mother, Sandra Morgan, standing by the bar arm in arm with a salt and pepper-haired man I didn't recognize. She wore a red sequin gown, bold lipstick, her eyes narrowing the moment they found me, like I had just ruined her wedding photos. My sister, Becky, was there too, with a new group of friends who looked like they'd just stepped out of Forbes magazine. Her dress was snow white, hair in soft curls, stiletto heels sharp enough to slice marble. She glanced at me briefly, then turned away, as if I was still the family cautionary tale they passed around like a warning. The lights dimmed. A mic crackled to life. The MC invited Dylan to the stage. He walked up slowly, no notes in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen, I won't speak of numbers tonight. Because tonight we don't measure in dollars. We measure in change. And the person behind that change, the one who rewrote how we define silence, is this year's program co-director." He turned toward me and held out his hand. "Please welcome Avery Morgan Whitford." No one clapped at first. But I stood walking toward the stage, each step calm, deliberate. When I placed my hand in Dylan's, the applause started, from a small corner, then building until the whole ballroom joined in. I stood at the microphone. The spotlight hit my face. My shadow stretched long behind me across the stage floor. I was once told to stay silent. That I wasn't good enough, obedient enough, worthy enough to appear in the family photo. I was once the name misspelled on a marriage certificate. The bride with no cake, no toast, no hug after the ceremony. The room fell silent. I was once called a stain. But tonight I stand here, carrying my own name, my own voice, and hundreds of letters from girls walking the very path I was once pushed off. Applause broke again. Then another wave. I lifted my eyes and met my mother's gaze. Her face stayed frozen, her hand gripping the champagne flute so tight her nails left marks. I continued steady. The scholarship I created isn't about revenge. It's a reminder that the children labeled burdens, the ones forgotten or thrown away, can become the ones who lead. I bowed. Thunderous applause erupted. But beneath it I heard a voice I recognized. "Well done. Using the Whitford name to stage your little performance." I turned. Becky stood close to the stage, hand on her hip, lips curled in mockery. "If it weren't for the Whitford name, would you even be here?" I stepped down the 3 stairs, never breaking eye contact. When I was just a few steps away, I slowly lifted my left hand, slipped the wedding ring off my finger, then slid it back on, deliberately on my own terms. "No one propped me up," I said quietly. I stood, right from the place they tried to bury me. I turned and walked away, leaving the stage behind. Back at our table, Dylan was already standing, handing me a glass of water instead of champagne. "They might forget who you are," he said. "But tonight they'll never forget where you stood." I smiled, eyes drifting to the stage now lit for the evening's next performance. And I knew, tonight wasn't a finale, but no one would ever erase me from the story again. I received the acceptance letter on a lightly rainy morning, while I was sorting out scholarship files for next fall's students. The envelope bore the logo of the Louisiana State Applied Medical School's part-time program. It wasn't marked urgent nor flashy, but to me it shone like a medal. I opened the letter barehanded, without a letter opener. Inside, the first line read, "We are pleased to inform you, Avery Morgan Whitford, that you have been accepted into the spring semester of the part-time Foundation in Medicine program." I stood still for a few seconds, then let out a soft chuckle, quiet, but loud enough for Dylan to call out from the next room, "What's the good news?" "Something they once said was no longer possible," I replied. "I had applied to med school once, back when I was 18, but after Aunt Rose passed I dropped everything. My mom said I was being too dreamy." Becky laughed, claiming I'd faint at the sight of blood. But now, at 35, the letter in my hand was the quietest answer I had ever given them. That afternoon I walked around the backyard garden, where Dylan had just planted new wild daisies. I brought along a handkerchief embroidered with the letter A, the only thing I had kept from that forced wedding day. Now it was freshly laundered, neatly folded, and always in my purse like a personal vow. As I watered the mint patch, my phone rang. "Becky Morgan." The screen lit up. I didn't pick up right away. Let it ring 3 times before answering. "Avery," my sister's voice trembled. "I'm listening." I saw your speech. You've really changed. You don't need to validate that. I already know." There was a long pause. "I'm sorry. For everything. I sat on the wooden porch step. The handkerchief rested in my palm. I don't need your apology to move forward. I've already chosen healing. But I'm not here to rescue anyone but myself. Becky said nothing. And I didn't need her to. I ended the call gently. No anger, no sadness, no strain. On the morning of my first class, I wore a white blouse and khakis. Simple, not showy, but enough to make me feel like myself. I tucked the folded handkerchief into my shirt pocket like a small flag, visible only to me. The campus stood atop a small hill surrounded by old oak trees. Students bustled about with laptops, to-go coffees, and backpacks. They looked younger than me, or maybe just less tired. I walked past the main gate, brushing my hand over the granite column engraved with the school's name. A young male student passed by, pausing mid-step to glance at my badge. Are you Dr. Witford? I smiled. Not yet. But soon. I kept walking toward the main building where orientation was being held. The breeze rustled through my hair, not carrying dust, not carrying judgment, just the scent of fresh paper and lingering spring. I didn't know yet if I'd become a doctor, a researcher, or simply a good teacher. But I knew this path no longer began in fear or ended in silence. As I stepped onto the first stair, a familiar feeling welled up in my chest, not nervousness but a deep calm. Because this time I wasn't entering the classroom to prove anything. I was walking in as my true self, my real name, my real soul, my real dream. The handkerchief in my pocket was no longer an ending. It was a hyphen between who I was and who I was becoming. Avery's story is proof that no one is born knowing how to stand tall, but everyone has the right to learn. From someone seen as a burden, forced into marriage, and erased from her family, she rewrote her life with determination and courage. In reality, no one gets to decide your worth, except you. And sometimes what feels like the end is really the beginning of a journey toward freedom, where you don't need anyone's approval to know you're enough. What do you think about Avery's journey? If it were you, would you stay silent, or rise like she did? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful stories about family, dignity, and freedom.